In this video, you're going to take a look at how to use the Navigator to navigate between pages with arguments, passing data, how to use the Navigator Named Route with arguments, how to use the PageRouteBuilder to create custom navigation transitions. Now, navigation is a major component in a mobile application, and good navigation creates a great user experience by making it easy to access information. Now, animation, while navigating to different pages, is also important if it helps to convey an action rather than simply being a distraction. Now, what does it mean? Just because you can show fancy animation, it doesn't mean you should. Use animations to enhance the user experience, not to frustrate the user. The Navigator widget manages a stack of routes to move between pages. You can optionally pass data to the destination page and back to the original page. To start navigating between pages, use the Navigator.push, pushNamed, and pop methods. Navigator is incredibly smart. It shows native navigation in iOS or Android. For example, when navigating to a new page in iOS, the new page slides in from the right, and in Android, it slides in from the bottom. The following example shows you how to use the Navigator of context.push method to navigate to the details page. The push method passes the route arguments. To push a new route argument, you create an instance of the material page route class that replaces the screen with the appropriate platform animation transition for iOS and Android. In the example, the full screen dialog property is set to true to present the details page as a full screen modal dialog. By setting the full screen dialog property to true, the detailed page app bar automatically includes a close button. In iOS, the modal dialog transition presents the page by sliding from the bottom of the screen towards the top, and this is also the default for Android. The following example shows you how to use the Navigator of Context pop method to close the page and navigate back to the previous page. You call the Navigator of Context.pop method, and the page closes by sliding from the top of the screen towards the bottom. The second example shows you how to pass a value back to the previous page by passing a result value argument. The result can be a single value, an object, list, like arrays, and so on. An alternate way to use Navigator is to refer to the page that you're navigating to by the route name. The route name starts with a slash and then comes the route name. For example, the details page route name is /details. The list of routes is built into the Material app widget. The routes have a map of string and widget builder, where the string is the route name and the widget builder has a builder to build the contents of the route by the class name of the page to open, in our case, details. To call the route, the Navigator of Context.pushName method is called by passing the route name argument. You also have an optional second argument to pass data. Now, to extract the arguments, the data, you call the model route of context.settings.arguments, and for this example, you access the data by calling the arguments variable key value. The PageRouteBuilder class is used to create custom route transitions. PageRouteBuilder provides an animation object. This animation can be used with tween and curve objects to customize the transition animation. You need to define a page builder function to create the route's content and define the transition builder function to add transition animation. Let's take a look at the example app. The home screen has a list of different transitions that you'll be able to create in this project. And it consists of, when a user taps on one of the items, this is the default Navigator transition, it'll go to a detail screen, and here the user will be able to change the values, tap the done button, and when it comes back, it will return the values back. But the main purpose of this app is to really show the different ways to use the Navigator to accomplish the tasks that you need to, and also how to add custom transitions. By doing this, let's take a look at the home screen first. And we are using a stateful widget for the home screen, since we're passing data back and changing it. And we are creating a list called Route Transition Type List to add these values to our list view here. And you are using a Route Transition Type class that consists of a title and a transition type to hold the values of each row. And the transition type is actually a numerator, an enum, which is located here in the transitions Dart file, which is just used to define our constant values for the type of transition that we're going to use, like size, scale, fade, rotate, and so on. All right, let's go back to the home screen. To add values to the route transition type list, we do this in the init state. So this means when the app first opens up, we'll chain the command add method here, and we'll use the route transition type by passing each value, the title, in this case the default, and the transition type, in this case the default transition. Now let's take a look at the build method. Now in the build method, we have the regular scaffold, we have an app bar, and for the body we have a safe area to handle any notches that the phones might have, whether it be on the top or the bottom. And then we're using a list view builder, and the builder is returning a card. That's why you have that kind of look there. And I like to use a list title, especially if you have multiple values, which in this case we don't, like a title and a subtitle and a leading icon and a trailing icon. It will align them nicely for us. But for the list title, we're passing in the title. We're using a text widget by using the route transition type list, the index that we're at, dot the title. So we want to populate this with the title value. Now the beauty of the list title also gives us this on tap. And on the on tap, when the user taps on one of these items, we're just going to call the default Navigator push. And we're using the default material page route, which uses a builder. And the builder will open up for us the details page. Now, details page is actually receiving the route type, which is actually the title of the transition that we are tapping on. But then we also have a call here, a callback, the then. And this will patiently wait here for a future so that when we go to the next screen, like say the default details screen here, when the user makes a change here and they tap the done button, once the done button is tapped back, you'll see that then we'll look for the edited value and it say, hey, if the edited value does not equal to null, that means there was a change that was made. And we're going to take the route transition type list at the index, at the current index that was tapped on, and let's replace the title by the edited value, which you notice it did here by saying default is cool, and it is. Very straightforward. Now, let's take a look at adding some transitions here. So let's comment out our default navigator that uses the material page route. Let's uncomment this code. And let's use the PageRouteBuilder. Now, still uses the navigator of context.push, but we're going to use our own page builder this time. By using our own page builder, we'll be able to create our own custom transition. Now, the page builder, the PageRouteBuilder, uses a page builder, and the page builder is returning the details page. So it's going to open up our details page. We pass in the same room type argument here as before. Now the page builder has a build context, an animation, and a secondary animation. The animation is for the transition opening the screen. Secondary animation is for the transitioning of closing the screen. Now we also have a transition builder, which has a context, an animation, the secondary animation, but it also passes the widget. And the widget is, we called it here child, because it's actually the details that is being passed in. So the transition builder returns a size transition. Now I'm also returning a line so the transition resizes from the middle of the screen upwards. So the size transition takes the size vector argument, which we're just passing the default animation. Now we could also pass a curved animation, which I'll show you a little bit later. And then the size transition takes a child, and for that child property, you were passing the child that was right from here, transition builder, which is the details page. Now we're also passing a transition duration. In this case, instead of 1,000 milliseconds, let's do 500 milliseconds. Normal would be anywhere between 300 and 500 milliseconds, which is 500 milliseconds is half a second. Let's run it and see what happens. Now, no matter where we tap, we're going to get the same size transition because that's the only thing that we have animated here. So as you can see, it's doing the size transition. Very straightforward. And now it is a little bit more verbose. Let's comment this out. And let's take a look at doing the PageRouteBuilder, which is the same thing that we just did here, but what we want to do is refactor that code and actually create a class that has that same code we can reuse over and over. And as you can see here, the Navigator push is now calling the size transition route class, which we'll take a look in a second. So it's a lot less verbose than before. If you notice here, we have quite a few lines before. Now it's very few lines. So let's take a look at that transition, at that size transition route class. And here's the constructor. So as you can see, we refactored that code and put it into a class. The class takes, for the argument, the widget, which is in our case, the details. The transition duration here is 1,000 milliseconds. So that means defaults to a slower transition, to animate it over a second, but we're overriding it. And we have the same page builder that we had before in the transition builder. So we're just calling a class, and really we're just passing the details parameter, and it handles it for us. So now let's go back to the home details, and let's run this and see what happens. We should expect the exact same size transition, right? Only this time, if you notice, it's a little slower because the class has a built-in duration of 1,000. Now let's go a little bit further and let's make this class a little bit more extensible. Because one of the things that you'll notice, let me go back to the transitions Dart file. If let's say I want to create other transitions like maybe a scale and a fade transition or a slide up, right? If you notice, if you create a class for each transition, there's a lot of code that you're reusing the same code, like the transition duration, the page builder, the transition builder, right? And then we're just modifying the transition builder to what we need. But this is very verbose. There's a little bit easier way to do this, a little bit more extensible. So what we're going to do next, we're going to use and create here a transitions class, which extends a PageRouteBuilder. Now, if you notice, it has some parameters that are being put in, some arguments. And if it's take a look at transitions class constructor, it is taking in the transition type, but it's also not defaulting to some values. A curve, which is the curve of animation when you open up the page. A reverse curve, which would be applied to the animation when you close the form, and also the duration. And if you notice here, we're giving it default values like elastic in and out for the curve, reverse curve ease out. And for the duration, it's defaulting to 500 milliseconds. And also the widget is being passed in, which in our case is the details page. Now we have the same transition duration, which is taking our duration argument, the page builder, but now, which is just returning the widget. But look at the transition builder now. This is where it's creating it where the class is now more extensible. There's more code reuse, less verbose because transition and page builder are only done once. And for the transition builder, we're going to use a switch with a case argument, switch case, looking at transition type being passed and say, hey, If the case that the transition type is size, then return the size transition. Or if it's scale, return the scale transition, and so on. If it's a fade, return the fade transition. So this is now a lot more extensible, and we can add all our transitions here that we might want to use in the app. Now also, let's take a look a little bit here on the slide transitions. The slide transitions for the position, you'll notice that they don't take an animation double, but they take an animation offset. So what we do is we use a tween, and we have a begin and end offsets, and then we do the animate and pass the actual animation. So that's a little bit different from the slide transitions from some of the other ones like the scale and size and so on. Now let's go back to the home screen. Let's uncomment this out. So we're going to use now the transition class, right, to handle multiple animations. Now I have an if statement. The first if statement is just saying, hey, if the transition type is a default transition, then just do the normal material page route. But if it's not, this is where we're using now our new transition class. The Navigator.push here is calling the transitions class. We're passing the transition type that was selected right here on the list, the duration, the milliseconds, the curve, the bounce in, which is the animation in, the reverse curve, fast out, slow in, which is the animation when we come out of the form, when the form gets closed. And we're passing that widget, so that argument is the details page, which has its own argument of a route type. And again, we still have our then callback that is waiting patiently here for a future, that once the user closes the page, it checks if the value was edited, and if yes, replace the current value in our list. So let's take a look. Default, it's going to do our default transition, right? And 1 second here, I forgot to comment out the PageRouteBuilder class. That means 2 navigators were being run at the same time. Now it should work. Size transition, as you can see, it's sizing correctly. How about the scale transition? Yes, scaling beautifully. Fade, absolutely. How about the rotate transition? Yep, and you can have fun with that. It's rotate and fade. Slide up transition. How about maybe the slide down transition? We also have a slide left transition. We have a slide right transition. Now let's say we want to pass the value back. If I can spell here. So I'm going to say done. And as you can see, our then was waiting patiently for that future value. And there it is. Now let's modify the curve, the reverse curve, to see what it looks like by using a different kind of curve. Instead of fast out, slow in, why don't we do the same thing and let's just say bounce in and out. And let us go back to the transition class. And for the size transition, instead of using the animation, let's use the curved animation. So we're going to override the default animation and see what it looks like. We should be able to see the curves. When we go in, it's the same curve, right? But when we close the page, the reverse curve, you'll see that now it's got that same bounce in and out. And there it is. So as you can see, you can play around with the animation and you can apply your own curves and create the exact transition that you need for your app. So how does it work? The Navigator widget manages a stack of routes to move between pages. To start navigating between pages, use the Navigator of context.push, push named, and pop methods. Now you optionally pass data to the navigation page and back to the original page. An alternate way to use Navigator is to refer to the page that you're navigating to by the route name. The route name starts with a slash and then comes the route name. Now to call the route, the Navigator of context.pushName method is called by passing the route name argument. You also have an optional second argument to pass data. Now to extract the arguments, your data, you call the model route of context.settings.arguments. The PageRouteBuilder class is used to create custom route transitions. PageRouteBuilder provides an animation object. Now, this animation can be used with a tween and curve objects to customize the transition animation.